Thank you. I am so excited to be here. This is my first time at Bild. I had been to Photo Plus before. I am Peter Baumgarten, an OM System ambassador. I've been with OM System Olympus since 2014, but I've shot with Olympus since I was 12, so I'm a dedicated brand user. And it is all about landscape photography. It's not the only thing that I shoot, but it is my first passion. And they've given me really limited amount of time to spill out a whole bunch of stuff, so I better get moving on this. So why landscape photography? For me, it's really all about exploring the outdoors. That's what I love to do. I paddle, I hike, I do all sorts of that kind of thing. I can't stay still, as you can see right now, because I'm too excited. All right, so I explore in order to photograph my surroundings, and if I get a great shot, fantastic. If I don't, I'm still out there in nature. I'm not a city boy. New York kind of scares me, but I love the outdoors. Okay, so over the years, I've had the great fortune of being able to travel a little bit. I'm from Canada, so I have been coast to coast in my beautiful country, and I certainly have had a lot of opportunities to travel here in the US as well. And again, I've been to sort of all four corners of the US. I haven't been to Alaska yet, but that's on my list of places to go. I've also had the opportunity to travel to other parts of the world as well, but most of the time, I'd say 99% of the time, I am photographing in my own backyard. And so I explore the lakes, as you see here. That's actually me in that canoe there. The rivers where I live, the forests, the fields, the hiking trails, I hope you don't get vertigo with that shot, and the shorelines of the island on which I live. I live on the world's largest freshwater island. You will see a map of it later. But of course, being from Canada, 5 months of the year, I am in the frigid cold. And so I love winter photography, and I do a fair amount of that, and I'm always carrying my snowshoes in my car when I'm out driving around at that time of the year. Now, I don't want to just show you a whole bunch of pretty pictures. That's not what I do. I want to give you sort of tips and techniques that I use in my own photography. I am sure that there probably won't be very many new ones. They might reaffirm things that you're already doing, but this is what I do in order to capture my images. And so I'm going to kind of break it up into a couple of sections. I want to start with some big ideas. And for me, this is a really important one, the importance of being prepared. Now, when I say that, you might think, well, being physically prepared, right? And that's important. Are my batteries charged? Are my cards formatted? Am I dressed for the conditions? All of that is important, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I think the most important thing is to be mentally prepared. Photography is a mental game. And so here's a quick story that kind of hopefully drives that point home. A few years ago, my wife and I had to drive a good friend of ours to the bus depot in the city closest to where I live, which is a 2-hour drive away. We dropped her off at the bus. She had to get back to Calgary, Alberta, and then we make our 2-hour drive home. But an hour into that drive, suddenly we hit this brutal snowstorm. Total whiteout conditions. I could not see a thing. I said to my wife, this is getting dangerous. We've got to get off the road. And I realized that there was a roadside stop just a short distance ahead. So we pull in there, stop the car, I peel my fingers off of the steering wheel because I was white-knuckling it, and I look out the window and I instantly see a photo, right? I looked at my wife and I said, hey, you want to be my model? She said, okay. I got out of the car, we got out of the car, I walked over to this one spot that where I could see the photo in my head, and I told her to go sit exactly in this one spot, and then I took this photograph here. All right? Not 2 minutes before I snapped the shutter on this, I was truly worried for our safety. But that didn't stop me from thinking as a photographer, right? I'm a photographer whether I'm holding a camera or not, because I think that way, and I think many of you do the same. That story and this image ended up in Shutterbug magazine the following winter, so it also paid off to think like a photographer as well, right? So many of my photographs come from situations like that. Most of them aren't kind of life and death kind of stuff, but so believe it or not, I took this photograph on my way to the grocery store. I know that around here you would never see a scene like that on your way to the grocery store, but I live in the boonies. And so if I do have a grocery store that's like a 2-minute walk away, but it doesn't have a great selection. So if I want a better selection, I have to make an hour drive. And this little lake I have passed 1,000 times in my car, but it had never looked like this. And so I pulled over, took 30 seconds, grabbed the shot. It looks like I could be somewhere in the middle of the Canadian wilderness. I'm standing on the highway leaning against a guardrail. That's what I'm doing to photograph that shot. On another occasion, I'm taking my youngest son back to college. That was a 3-hour drive. I think it turned into a 6-hour drive because the hoarfrost that day was so incredible. I stopped multiple times in order to photograph it. All right, here I am on my way back from the chiropractor. All right, I have a little bit of a bad back on occasion, and I decided to take a different way home. Found, these are trilliums, that's our provincial flower in Ontario where I live, and I stopped the car, ran into the bush, and took a whole bunch of shots of that amazing scene. So lots of times I see something, there's an opportunity, and I know that if I don't take that opportunity, it's gone. All right, so that's the first thing, being mentally prepared to take the shot. Second thing, this is a little bit more concrete, and you're all familiar with it, the importance of light in our photographs. But unfortunately, too many people don't take that as seriously as they should. I just judged a fairly large art show back home, and I have to say that a huge number of the people did not pay attention to the quality of the light, and that really shows in their photographs. And I want to kind of prove that here with this next little story. So this is a spot about 20 minutes north of where I live. And from a compositional standpoint, there's a lot of things going on in this photograph that I think are good. There's a leading line here, the river, the dock adds a point of interest in the foreground. You've got the tree for balance there, and the horizon is in the top third. So a lot of compositional elements at play, but honestly, this photo sucks. Why? The most important thing is missing, and that is good light. Compare it to this. Exactly the same photograph, and I can hear the murmurs out there, so your reaction is the same thing as what I wanted. That is a much, much better version of that scene because now I went out when it wasn't convenient. I'm out there very early in the morning, it's cold out, but that's when I have to go out and play because that's when the good light will hit. When OM System released the OM1 a few years ago, they sent me a pre-release version, which they do on occasion as an ambassador. And I was so excited to go out and play with it. I went out, and this was one of the first shots that I took with it. And I don't know if you can see the timestamp, the chairs are in the way, but this was shot at 5 in the afternoon. So this was February, I think. Sun is setting, golden hour, perfect time to go out and shoot. So I came up with this composition, but I was not going home after the sunset. Light changes quite dramatically over fairly short periods of time. I wait around an hour. Now it's 6 o'clock in the evening. I'm standing almost in the same spot as I was with the previous photo, but the light has completely changed. I'm not in golden hour now, I'm in blue hour, and I like this photo actually better than the previous one. Right? Then I think, no, I still can't go home. I was just too excited. I got to shoot. And I think, I'm going to go stand on the other side of this range light. And I walk over to that spot. A half an hour later, this is what the scene looks like. Okay? The light changes quite dramatically, but even when golden hour is gone, you don't have to stop shooting. Now, of course, this kind of light, I don't think anyone would disagree is good light. But even terrible conditions can lead to interesting photographs. I love a good moody scene. So I'm going to stick with this range light here because it's fairly close to where I live and I go there, a few times a year to shoot it. But clearly not typical golden hour good light, but that can create a really, really good mood in a shot. So dramatic sky, a little bit of motion in there, and a little bit of selective color for the light itself. When other people are huddled around their fireplace, I'm out shooting, because that can create a far more interesting shot than, sort of regular good weather. And so snowstorm, I'm in, all right? Just like that shot with my wife there sitting on the bench. The other thing to pay attention to with lighting is the direction of the light. So I like camping, and I went out canoeing. This is a provincial park that we have back home, and I knew that we were going to have a good sunset, so I paddled quickly across the lake. I set up my camera here so I'd get these rocks in the foreground, and I love this shot, but then I look behind me, and I see, oh, the light looks quite different back there. Now, I didn't have enough time to scout out a new location, so I just walked over there. and I turned the camera in the other direction, and I ended up with this shot. 30 seconds, maybe a minute apart, the light looks quite different. All right, you can decide which of those two you like better, but I'm glad that I at least took the time to shoot in a couple of different directions, because of course the light can change. Now this next big idea is controversial, but stick with me. Composition is everything, and settings don't matter. Okay, well, maybe they matter a little, but they matter a lot less than you might think, especially in landscape photography. When I first started doing this thing, like speaking in front of people like yourself, this is what my slides would look like, just the photograph. And invariably through a presentation, people would raise their hand and ask, well, what settings did you use? And I couldn't remember, so I'd make them up. Right? I had a pretty good idea, but I didn't really know. And so I got so tired of that question being continually asked that finally I just included the settings. So you can see those down here in the bottom left. And those are the actual settings for this photograph. But quite honestly, I could have used these, or these, and I would have gotten almost the exact same results. Because in landscape photography, you have such a broad range of settings. Okay, now that is, yay, good. All right, I have somebody agrees, I'm preaching to the choir here. That is not the case in wildlife photography, and that is not the case in night sky photography, two things that I also shoot a fair amount, not in sports and that kind of thing. But in landscape, it doesn't matter as much. What matters is the thinking process, right? So when I pick up my camera, some of you might be asking, well, what shooting mode am I using? For landscape photography, 100% of the time, I am shooting aperture priority. Do I get another round of applause for that? No? All right. Some people love manual. Not me. I just want to focus on the aperture. Not that I don't pay attention to the other settings, but 100% of the time I'm shooting aperture priority. Not for wildlife, not for astro, but for landscape, yes. When I pick up my camera and turn it on at this setting, wherever I might be, I look through the viewfinder and that's what I might see. So clearly I'm in aperture priority. You see the A. I've got my f6.3 highlighted there in yellow, but I do pay attention to the ISO and to the shutter speed, right? Those are key in that exposure triangle. And so I look at those and make sure that they're going to sort of fit within the parameters of the scene. And very quickly, 5 questions pop into my head. All right, will that aperture give me the depth of field that I want, right? Because aperture is the creative setting. And so I look at f6.3, and with my camera, I know that in a scene like this, that'll be just fine. Had I turned the camera on and it said f7.1, I would have been fine with that too. f8 would have worked. Probably f5.6 would have worked for this. I don't sweat it. It doesn't have to be a precise setting. Okay, second question. I look at that shutter speed and I think, okay, do I want to freeze any motion in this shot? Do I want to blur stuff? In most landscapes, I'm happy with something kind of in between, so 1/125th of a second would work. But if that had said 1/60th, I probably would have been okay with that too. 1/250th would have been fine. I'm not going to sweat that. Okay, next question that pops into my head. In order to get those two, what's the lowest ISO I can shoot with, right? And so if it's getting quite dark, I may have to bump up that ISO. If it's still bright, I can go down to ISO 200 or lower than that if I need to. Right? And then, because I'm shooting mirrorless, what's the overall exposure look like, right? What you see is what you get through the viewfinder, through the LCD, and I can instantly tell that that's the exposure that I want. And if I don't like it, I will use the exposure compensation dial. I'll just dial it up or dial it down, which is very easy to do in aperture priority. And quite honestly, most of the time I go down a little bit. I stop it down, I go down maybe 0.3, 0.7, and that's usually what I'm shooting with most of my landscape shots. And then the last thing that I do before I click the shutter is I just look at where did I put the focus point, right? So normally I want to focus within the first third of that scene. And those 5 questions go through my head like that, right? I don't actually say them out loud or something like that. But those are the 5 things that I look for in my shooting. Keep this in mind. Nobody ever looks at a photograph and says, oh my gosh, what amazing settings you've used, right? Nobody ever does that, and no publisher will ever reject your image because they don't like the settings you used. It just doesn't happen, all right? Setting questions might come afterwards, but it's never the first reaction. All right, we are artists. This is an art form, and I want to create a good piece of art in my photography, and so I need to keep these things in mind. Let's go back to your high school art class, just in case you've forgotten them. There are two things here in art. You've got elements, right? Here are all the elements of design. Those are the building blocks for almost any work of art, including in photography. And then how you put those elements together, those building blocks, those are the principles. And I don't have time to go through all of those right now, so I'm just going to focus on one. The one for me that is the absolute most important, and that is line. I'm sure that many of you have created a shot like this one. Right? Clearly, I am using line to draw your eye into the frame and lead it through, right? We've probably all stood in the middle of the road, hopefully not got run over. Here's one that, you know, a scene here from the US that many of you are familiar with. Run, Forrest, run. Do you remember, do you know that one? All right. So, you know, you can't always create compositions like this, but I used exactly this sort of technique to create the next shot, and these two images were shot thousands of kilometers apart, right? But this is essentially the same compositional strategy, even though now I'm sitting in my kayak, but it's the same way that I put the shot together, right? So I want to lead the eye into the frame in some way. I don't always create an image like that. So this is using line as well, but the lines are a little bit more chaotic in order to get this shot. And I love this image, the perfect reflection in this wetland, right? Forests are great for photography, although they can be a little challenging at times. I love the strong, powerful vertical lines. There's another shot of me in there, right? That one, that shot there in the winter was back home. This one is in Florida. And waterfalls can create amazing, strong vertical lines as well. This is Johnson's Creek in Alberta, right? This is a reflection that I shot 2 weeks ago when I was in Alberta. These are trees, reflected. That's not camera movement or anything like that. And to present it, all I did was flip it upside down. All right, so this is an upside-down photograph, and that's just reflections, but it was the lines that I really liked. I don't do a lot of urban photography, but of course, this is about as urban as it gets for me back home. That's not my house. But of course, in an urban environment, in a man-made environment, we've got lots of strong linear elements. Most of the time, I am looking for more organic use of lines like this. And these dunes, this is Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado, and I just loved the use of line, and those are my footprints, and it created a flow that I really, really loved. A totally miserable experience. It was so cold, so windy, but I'm so glad that I was up there. I hid behind that dune for about an hour, waiting for the sun to get into the right position, right? And so, most of the time when I'm trying to use line, I'm looking for ways that I can create a linear element where your eye has to flow through the shot, as in this case here. The way I place my camera is very, very strategic. I hardly ever use a tripod. I don't need to use a tripod most of the time because of image stabilization, but had I moved the camera 2 or 3 inches this way or 2 or 3 inches that way, I wouldn't have been able to line up these crevices with the setting sun, and that's very, very intentional. Remember, we don't take photographs, we make them, right? Now, one of the things that I think as a photographer we're always trying to do is to see the world differently. And I was kind of a student of a great Canadian photographer called Freeman Patterson, who wrote a book all about seeing the world differently. But a big part of that, and sometimes things that workshop leaders miss, is the importance of how your gear sees the world differently. We are not using cameras anymore. We're using computers with lenses attached to them. So I am an OM system ambassador. I shoot with OM gear, right? Olympus, as it used to be called. I'm shooting right now with the OM1 Mark II. And if I'm out shooting landscape, those two lenses come with me everywhere I go. So that's kind of the base kit. But by no means is it the only thing that I shoot with. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of lenses that I will often turn to that you might not think of when you shoot landscapes. And I don't care if you shoot with OM System or not. Sorry guys from OM System, but it's kind of the truth. All right? As long as you're out there enjoying nature and shooting. So, another quick story that involves my wife, because she is very much involved in what I do. A few years ago, we were doing this autumn tour through Northern Ontario, photographing the amazing autumn colors that we have. By the end of the day, we were both tired and hungry, so we found this amazing lakeside restaurant. We pulled in, we walked into the restaurant, we sat down, waitress brings us the menus, and then I made a mistake. I looked out the window, and I saw something. And I said to my wife, order anything off the menu you want, I'm out of here. I ran to the car, grabbed my gear, ran down to the shore, and I ended up taking this shot. All right? Pretty nice view for a restaurant, right? Now, everything in that story is absolutely true except for one small detail. This is not the first photograph that I captured. This was. All right? And I hope you would agree that this one isn't nearly as good as the one that I had just shown you, because I'm a landscape photographer, and typically I think wide angle, big picture kind of stuff. And so when I took that with my wide angle lens, I looked at it on the viewfinder and said, yeah, that's not going to cut it. Way too much negative space, and this moon was this tiny little speck that just wasn't standing out. So I quickly switched to a telephoto lens, zoomed into that area, and grabbed that shot instead, right? So a telephoto lens can be fantastic. And I find myself more and more using a telephoto lens for landscape photography. Here's another example. I told you that I live on an island. That's the only way off the island for most of the year. We do have a ferry in the summer, but for most of the year, you gotta cross that swing bridge. And so one January morning, I go out and I'm photographing the scene, and I start with a wide angle lens, or 12 to 40 that we've got. And I'm okay with the shot, but I realize, nah, it's not really what I like. The foreground's not interesting enough. So I zoom in as far as I can, which was to the 40 millimeter range, or equivalent to 80. And still, nah, it's not quite cutting it. I love the sun, I love the silhouette of the bridge, but there's all this other garbage over here that I don't like. So I switch lenses again, and now I really zoom in and I get this shot. I love this so much better than the other two, because now I'm eliminating all of those other distractions. And then I thought, well, let's go in a little bit farther. And I do this. Now, I don't know which one of those two last ones that I like better, but I know I like them way better than the first two because of the fact that I've now eliminated so much other stuff. And that's one of the really cool things about photography. Oh, the power you have as a photographer. You have the power to control what other people see, as I'm doing here. But more important than that, you have the power to control what people don't see. So in this photo, taken in Yoho National Park in Alberta, you don't see the mountains, you don't see the sky, you don't see the foreground of the shore on which I'm standing, because I don't want you to see it. I want you to see the trees, the texture, the reflections, and this one red canoe entering the scene, right? That's the power that we have as a photographer, right? Sometimes you have no choice but to use a telephoto lens, like when I went to Antarctica and you're on a cruise ship and you can't tell the captain to go over there because that's where you want to take the shot. You just can't do that. So I think on my trip a few years ago, that's all I shot with was the a super telephoto lens, so I could bring those distant objects in close, right? And it's that compression factor that can make a telephoto lens a really great lens for shooting, right? That layered effect that you get here, or in this one, this is in Washington State, the other one was back home, right? This one I just shot, but you know, the twisty roads all compressed with a long lens make for a far better shot than with a wide angle lens. When I'm shooting sunrises or sunsets, I typically think wide angle, unless there's a particular way the sun is looking. And in this case, this was in April, I see this scene, I take this shot, yeah, it's all right, nothing special. But then I notice the sun. And the way it's being filtered by the clouds, I think I can make that look way better than this. So I switched to a longer lens, zoomed right in, and I end up with this shot. Thank you. Maybe a minute apart, probably less than that. Just the time that took me to switch lenses. Hard to believe these are the same two locations, or these two shots were shot in the same location. And so I'm so glad that I ended up making that decision, because when I got home and posted it, I sold a copy of it, right, as a print. So that was great. Yes, I did. Yeah. I carry them in my camera bags. I don't know if you heard what she said. Do you hire, or he said, do you hire the birds to be in there? Yeah. And I hired the boat there too. So, but anytime that I see a misty morning and the sun is going to go through it, I instantly think, got to get a telephoto lens so that I kind of get that red rubber ball effect. And I love shooting with a long lens for these kinds of things, right? They can really look good. And so stop necessarily thinking wide angle. All right? I saw these people. I'm standing a kilometer away. All right? So that's a little less than a mile, sixth of a mile or something. No, not a sixth of a mile, 6/10 of a mile. Canadian, sorry. But when I saw those people come out, and I'd been shooting with a wide-angle lens, I thought, well, I can't get any closer to them. There was too much water in between us. I switched to a long lens, our 150 to 400, zoomed in. They had no idea I took the shot, but then I still wasn't quite finished. When I'm doing shots like this with a long lens, I instantly start thinking panos. I could have just zoomed out a little bit more, but I don't do that. I start taking a whole bunch of shots so that I can stitch those later. I wasn't using a tripod, and so my aim kind of got all messed up a little bit, right? That's kind of spraying a little bit there, but I know that Lightroom can all put it together quite nicely, and so I ended up with this nice panorama of it, and I do that quite often so that I get a bigger print and a whole bunch of shots that I can then stitch together, okay? I also, so let's stop with the telephoto for a second, I also go to the other extreme. So normally I'm shooting wide angle. What's more extreme than wide angle? Fisheye. All right, so this is a fisheye lens, 180-degree field of view. It may not look like a fisheye lens because you don't notice any significant distortion. And that's not because I did anything in post. This is the way the photo came out, right? The reason it doesn't look distorted is because it doesn't look like that. Right? As long as you keep the horizon right in the center, I don't like this image, but I'm showing it to you, so that's kind of what you think of when you think fisheye. But as long as you keep the horizon in the middle, a fisheye can give you a really great field of view. And I was literally standing balanced on that. I wrapped my legs around the fence so that I could get up nice and high and get sort of an elevated view of that line, that linear element. And I didn't want to do a pano for that, so I used my fisheye. Right? The other great thing about a fisheye lens is you can use it in really compressed spaces. I'm in a tiny little ice cave that forms, you know, in the winter back home, and I'm lying on my belly. I couldn't even get on my knees, it's so small, but a fisheye lens allows me to see far more of it, making things look bigger than they actually are. Right? This is a waterfall that freezes every winter close to where I live, and a fisheye lens allows me to capture all the details in the ice and the rock and that kind of thing. But because the lines are so organic, you can't tell that there's any distortion from the 180-degree field of view. Right? Now, that's the lenses that we attach to our cameras to make things look different. There's also, of course, what's built into the camera, or filters that you can add. But I hardly put any filters on my lenses anymore, except for a circular polarizer, because we've got features that allow us to do that in camera. So this is my wife sitting at the end of a dock, and I liked the composition, but I didn't like what the water was doing. I want water that's really rough for drama or flat as glass, and this was neither. So I thought, well, I can't control everything, but I think I can smooth out that water by adding an ND filter. I could do that, but instead I used Live ND, which is a computational feature that we have. And so that allowed me to use a longer exposure in brighter conditions, which is what a neutral density filter does, and I like that far better. So that's without Live ND on the left, that's with Live ND, no glass, extra glass required. And I use Live ND all the time, especially when water is involved, right? I love that silky look of waterfalls and that kind of thing. Some people don't, but I think most people kind of like that look, and I love it. And so the Live ND means I'm not carrying extra glass or shooting through another layer of glass, right? So that's how I took that shot. Right? Wave action is also great for getting that same kind of silky look as the waves are coming in. I do that all the time. All right? This is in Rhode Island, Beavertail Lighthouse. All right, and I can also use it for intentional camera movement. So I just initiated this so that I get some nice little movement in there. There's another filter that I used to add to my collection in my camera bag that I no longer use, and that's my GND filter, my graduated neutral density filter. And for years and years and years, that's what I would use. And I'd still be using it if OM System didn't come up with live GND. So it allows me to actually do this in camera. If you're not familiar with that, what it does is it's got a tinted section on the top, clear on the bottom. You stick that in so you can balance the exposure between the sky and the foreground. Without a GND filter, it looks more like this, right? The sky is blown out a little bit, the foreground's a little dark, you add a GND filter and it balances the exposure. But I don't need to add the filter anymore, I just do it in camera. So I initiate the feature, there's the horizon line, that's where the gradation would be if you were using a GND, and I have a lot of control over that. I can lower it down if I want, I can angle it if I need to. Let's say there was a hill or a slope of some kind, and that allows me to get that balanced look that I want so that I don't have to do that in Lightroom later or HDR stuff in camera. Right? And so I do that for almost all of my landscapes. So I use the live GND for this shot as well. Right? There is one filter, though, that I do still carry around because it does allow me and my camera to see things the way my eyes could never see them. This is not the way this scene looked. By putting a 10-stop ND filter there, I could really slow down time. This is a 60-second exposure. The water turned to glass, the clouds are moving, the colors became richer. Here's a before and after, not for this scene, but here's a little before and after story that involves my granddaughter. So we have a cottage on a small little island in northern Ontario, and we went to the cottage one weekend, and as I'm shooting sort of the end of the light for that day, my granddaughter comes up to me and she says, "Papa, can I be in your photograph?" I said, "Sure." So she decided to sit there on the rock, and then I take this photograph. And then I look at it and realize, nah, there's a lot of things here that I don't like. Number one, there's way too much negative space. I wanted to narrow that gap there. I didn't like that, just me personally. And then I love the rocks in the foreground, but I wanted to show more of those. For me, foreground features are really important. And then, of course, the water wasn't the way I like it. So I thought, I'm going to stick that 10-stop ND filter on it. I recomposed the shot, and I ended up with this. Again, probably a minute passed by between that shot and this one, but what a difference. This is the way it looked to my eye, but that's what the 10-stop filter did to it, right? So it totally changed the look. And that's what I'm after. And so I will use that quite often in my photographs as well if I want to sort of get the clouds to stretch out and the water to become completely calm. All right, I'm here to talk about landscapes, not cloudscapes exactly. When I say that term, you might think of something like this, or like this, or like this. And I love these shots, and of course, clouds are critical for something like this, if this is the look that I'm going for, but in almost all of my landscape shots, clouds are important. If it wasn't for those clouds and the way the light was shining in through here, I don't think this shot would be as interesting as it was. And so I'm constantly looking for how the clouds are playing with the light, because that's my studio. I don't have any extra lighting out there. I've got to use what Mother Nature gives me. And so I'm looking for drama, I'm looking for color, I'm looking for texture, and that is often what leads to a better shot. It's not necessarily the subject in the foreground, right? It's the clouds here that make the shot, not the geese, right? It's the clouds. And that leads to planning. Planning is really important in all kinds of photography. Sometimes you get the spur of the moment stuff, but most of the time I have to plan, and this is where I start. I look at the weather forecast, I go to Environment Canada for me, and look at the temperatures, and that's Celsius, not Fahrenheit. And so that's how I plan. As a landscape photographer, this is what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for this. As an astro landscape photographer, I'm looking for that. But most of the time, I want a little bit of clouds to play with. So another little story. Back in February, I look out my window, and this is what I see. Overcast skies. Now, back in the old days, that's all I would do. I'd look outside, and if I didn't like the conditions, I wouldn't go out and shoot. And that would create some really flat lighting, and I probably wouldn't go out. But we don't live in those times anymore, so I fire up my computer, I go to and I look at a satellite image. Right, so I look at the satellite image, and for those of you now, I'll sort of show you where I live. There's an island that's not drawn on this map. That's where I live. We're down over there somewhere. And what really caught my eye in this image was not the clouds that were over top of me, but all of this area of clear sky. The sun sets in the west. The clear sky was towards the west. I thought maybe I could get a photograph. Next thing I have to figure out is, well, where do I go? So that's the island on which I live, and I live right there. I get a great easterly view, great sunrise location, terrible sunset location. So I knew I had to go somewhere else. And I decided to go to the little town of Providence Bay, right there. That's a 45-minute drive for me. It's a pretty big island. Manitoulin Island is the name of it. And so before I hit the road for that 45-minute drive, I do one more thing. I look at photographer's ephemeris. I want to know where the sun's going to be. Is it really worth my time to go out and shoot? Am I actually going to see the sun there? And I realized with the sun setting along the shoreline, and if I stood where that pin is, I should be good. Now, while I'm kind of talking about this, when I'm at home, I use photographer's ephemeris. I love it. When I'm traveling, I will use photo pills, and many of you would be familiar with that, because you can do exactly the same thing, and it is quite powerful, great on your phone. I prefer photographer's ephemeris when I'm at my computer. So I hit the road, off I go, and when I get there, this is the scene that greets me. I always try to get there a half an hour at least before I get there, and I didn't ignore everything else in this photograph. What I was most interested in was the little narrow band of gold that you see there. That was the clear sky that I'd seen on the satellite image. So I've got a little bit of time to get in position, and then the light show happened. And for a very brief moment, it looked like that. That is not hypersaturated in Photoshop or Lightroom or anything. That is the way it looked. It was just incredible, but it lasted 5 minutes or less. Had I just relied on me looking out the window, seeing those overcast skies, I never would have done this. And so I'm constantly, every day, several times a day, I look at a satellite image. And these days, I'm using Zoom Earth. You can get it on your phone. You can get it on your desktop computer. And again, just as a point of reference so you know where I live, oops, that didn't happen. You saw where Toronto was, and I live up at the top. I'm not going to go back. But clouds are absolutely critical to the look of a photograph, right? Without these clouds, I don't think this shot would work. Right? But you also have to know how to read the clouds, right? The clouds can add a whole bunch of drama to your shot, but you sort of, like I said, you have to know how to read them. If you've got low clouds, like in this shot, you can get some incredibly intense color, but it will not last very long. So again, 5-10 minutes max if you've got a little bit of clear sky towards the west for a sunset or the east for a sunrise. If you have cirrus clouds, right, higher level clouds, you can get some really nice pastels. This is the same night while I was sailing. You can get some really nice color pastels, and they will last a lot longer, up to an hour after the sun has set in some cases. But so you have to know how much time you've got to work with depending on the height of those clouds. Right? So just another example with some nice high cirrus clouds, lots of time. My favorite type of cloud to work with is mist and fog. I absolutely love it. I'm in my canoe here on this particular morning in this lake, and when August and September comes around, this is what I look forward to. The lakes are still warm, the air is getting cooler, and almost every morning this is what greets me. Right? And it allows you to isolate your subject, create some really cool atmosphere in your shots. I love shooting through the mist. Right? Also, isolate your subject. If the mist wasn't there, I never would have photographed that tree. It would have blended into the background too much. Right? Now, no clouds does not mean no photography. If there were puffy little cumulus clouds in here, I don't think it would actually improve this photograph. I think the blue sky against the white snow actually works really well in this shot. So that it's not a non-starter if there's no clouds. But then often when there are no clouds, I make a point of staying later for blue hour or getting out earlier. If I know it's going to be a clear sky, I get out at least an hour before the sun rises, because then the sky will be nice and rich. There'll be some nice rich color. If it's a half an hour before, that's too late. The sky's starting to already kind of gray, and it's not going to work. right? Or I put almost no sky in the photograph at all and just have more foreground, right? Often I find people are putting way too much sky in their photographs. Even if it's a nice, brilliant, colorful sky, look for better foregrounds. Or I put something in the sky to completely cover it, right? You can barely see the sky here, but the light is coming through the white pine branches. Or forget the sky completely. Zoom right in and forget about any sky, and that might actually make your shot a little bit better. Okay. One of the more classic ways of creating a composition is by having a good foreground, midground, and background, right? Having different layers and multiple subjects in your photograph, and I do that in most of my images, or at least I try to. If I were to ask you what is the main subject in this photograph, I'm hoping that very quickly you'd say the... Okay, interesting. Canoe is where my eye goes, so I'm hoping that eventually your eye goes to the canoe. That's kind of where I want your eye to rest. But in the foreground, in the midground, and in the background, there is something to see in there. There's something at every level. In this shot, what's the main subject? Well, the thing that caught my eye was the building. All right? And then my job is to try to accentuate that, but include a good foreground. The building is in the midground, and I've got the frosted trees in the background. Notice that in both of these two shots, my main subject is not at the front of the frame, and it's not the largest thing in the frame. I rarely make my subject the biggest thing. I want people to be able to look through and see a bunch of stuff in my images. It's all sort of a very conscious construction. Right? Just another example, so those two were both shot in vertical, but of course the classic landscape horizontal shot, you can do exactly the same thing. This photo ended up winning a national competition in Canada, probably because of that sort of midground, foreground, background kind of thing. So adding depth is important. Nowadays I try to add even more depth to my images by using focus stacking. This is the very first focus stacked image that I ever shot, right? Those lily pads are about this far away from my front lens element, but Venus, way up in the sky, is also sharp. You can't do that with one single shot, no matter what aperture. So I use focus stacking, and I do that so often where I have the camera really close to a foreground, but everything in the background is nice and sharp as well. The ice, that far away, the moon, quite far away. Right? This is another example of that, and this photograph won the landscape category 2 or 3 years ago in Canada for Canadian Geographic. But I use that technique all the time now. Focus stacking, a lot of people think, is for macro photography. Sure, but it can be used to great effect in landscape photography as well. All right, I know I'm starting to run out of time, so I better start talking faster. What I love about stacking is something really small can become a very dominant feature in your photograph and add some really cool foreground interest to it, and I try to do that quite often in my shots. Of course, you can go the opposite direction as well. Instead of having maximum depth of field, have only a little bit of depth of field by opening up your camera, right? Having a larger aperture. When I shot this field of daisies, there was just too much chaos. I didn't like what I saw. I didn't know where my eye was supposed to go, and there was nothing else in the field for interest. There wasn't an interesting tree or an old building or something like that. So I just went as close as I could to one particular daisy that was standing up a little taller and ended up with this shot. And it wasn't until I got home that I realized, hey, I think this daisy's smiling. Do you see the eyes? But I didn't notice that at the time. All right, and so I will often limit the depth of field because it's all about isolating the subject so that the viewer's eye knows exactly where to go. All right, you can tell that's a person in the background, happens to be me, but that's the only part in focus. All right, similar kind of thing here. You know what's in the background, you can tell what it is, but it's the roses where your eyes end up resting. And so I use this technique a fair amount as well. We have multiple techniques in our toolkit. Right? Sometimes it's the foreground that's out of focus. Right? Playing with aperture takes practice. It can take years of practice to realize, like, this is shot at f8. I would never use f8 necessarily if I wanted to have a blurry background, but because my camera was so close, I wanted to get this entire cleat sharp and leave the background out of focus there. All right, another technique that I use quite often is some kind of natural frame. When I photographed this old barn here, it was a beautiful June morning. nice mist hanging over the field, and I get there and I look at this photograph and I go, that's not going to cut it. How can I improve this shot? And then I see those maple trees over on the right, and I walk over there about 50 feet from where I'm standing, I reframe the shot and end up with this. For me, it really is all about control. I wasn't kidding when I said I want the power. I want the power to force you to move your eye where I want it to. And by putting that frame in here, you have no choice. Your eye goes right there. And that's a conscious decision again. Right? Similar kind of thing. So this is a full frame. I'm standing at the mouth of this little cave. Captured another photographer there. This is all a conscious decision as to how I'm going to frame the shot to get your eye to go where I want it to. Sometimes, of course, the frame isn't complete. Doesn't have to be, but that helps to add some cool interest in the foreground and then draw your attention to the lighthouse that you see there. Again, not a complete frame, but it helps to balance and anchor the shot. So I do that a fair amount. Right? This one was a tricky one. I wanted the waves to frame the shot, but you can't control that, so that took many attempts to get that one. Sometimes it's not about the background, it's about the frame itself, just the frame. I didn't care what was back there. I wanted the gold in the aspen leaves to shine in this case. Same thing with this ice cave. Didn't really matter what was back here. I mean, the sun was important, but it was that made a difference. This is kind of a how-to here. I was walking along this cliff edge. I saw this opening. I couldn't get in there, but my camera could, so I reach in. I start the time-lapse feature and end up with that shot. All right? I saw this crevice. I wanted to get in there, but I'm too small or too big for that. But my camera could get in there, so I attached my camera to my tripod, extended the legs, put it down, used the time-lapse feature, and that was one of the shots. So I'm about 6 feet up taking that shot. All right? This is just another one. I stuck my camera inside a stump. All right? And use the time-lapse feature to do that. All right, time to go and shoot some people. No, not shoot people, include people. A lot of people don't like including people in their photographs, but I do on occasion. I try not to overdo it. I think Instagram has overdone it. When I was shooting this waterfall, all of a sudden this kid comes marching through my frame. And what did I do? I just kept shooting. All right? Because I think it adds to the story. It's all about telling stories with people. And any one of those shots would work for me. Right? When this family arrived, they didn't even see me with my camera there, but that girl dancing in the waves totally made the shot. It helps tell the story. Often it's my wife that I'm photographing. I tried to get her to go up this ice arch. I don't know why she didn't want to. All right? Another reason to include people is because of scale. These are ice features where I live, not at this time of the year. But if it wasn't for her, you wouldn't be able to tell just how big those cliffs are. These are my kids in Colorado hiking through this forest, and again, scale is important for including people. Great sand dunes again. Look at how tiny those people are. Clearly indicates just how big these dunes are.
Where is that?
Great Sand Dunes National Park is, I don't know exactly where in Colorado, but somebody would know. All right, delicate arch. Again, the people help give you a sense of scale. When there's no one else to shoot, I will shoot myself. All right, and so that's as selfie as it gets. All right, well, not quite. That's the only selfie I have ever taken. When Olympus came out with the OM1, or OM system came out with it, I had to show myself after shooting all night. That was the scene that I was shooting. All right, but by the time morning arose, I was totally frosted over, but the camera kept working. All right, last thing, and I know I'm almost done, or I'm over time. Keep it simple. This is the most important thing for me, and it's the last thing that I want to talk about. The importance of keeping your photographs as simple as possible. When I say that, you might think minimalist. I would consider this a minimalist photograph, but that's not really what I'm talking about. This might be also considered a minimalist photograph. And I like this style, don't get me wrong. But again, that's not really what I mean. What I'm talking about is trying to make sure that nothing is in your photograph that you don't want there. Keeping the composition simple, right? And so with every shot that I do, there isn't anything that I don't want there. Truly, I work really hard to make sure the shot looks the way I want it to. All right? No matter what kind of landscape. Thousands of trees there, still a simple composition. When I'm teaching, I used to teach high school photography, and I've done workshops as well. There's one piece of advice that I always tell people. Once you've determined what your subject is, forget about it. All right? Forget about the subject and focus on everything else in the frame. Know where you want to put your subject, but then spend a moment and look around the viewfinder. It may be a tiny little window, but there's a lot of space in there once you get your eye to the viewfinder. And if there's something that might pull focus, get rid of it. Figure out a way to eliminate that. We've all gone to our computers later, saw it on the big screen, and realized, oh crap, I didn't notice that before. And there it is, right? And so, one last little story. This was the first time I'd ever been to this park. And there was an amazing sunset about to occur. We arrived in the middle of the day, set up our camping gear, and it was raining like crazy. By the time evening rolled around, the rain had stopped, the clouds were beginning to part, and I knew it was going to be a great sunset. So I hadn't explored yet. I couldn't find a space where I could actually shoot. So I get to this spot right here, and I take this shot, and I hate this shot. I got this stump over here. I got a whole bunch of clutter. It's just, there's too much mess in this photograph, and I don't want that. How can I fix this? I didn't have enough time to find another location. So I thought, well, let's just zoom in. Let's zoom in past everything, and I end up with this shot. Okay, that's better. It's a simpler composition, but it's not enough. It's such a cool sunset. I need to see more. So I thought, well, let's turn the camera into vertical and back off a little bit. I don't mind a little bit of foreground in here, and I like that better. And then finally, I just said, to heck with it. And I kicked off my shoes, I ripped off my socks, I rolled my pants all the way up, all right, as far as they would go, and I walked into the water right up to about there, and finally I could get rid of all of that clutter, and I ended up with that shot. All right, so it's just a set of images to show you sort of the thinking that went behind it. And this is not a single image. This is a pano. Click, 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 click. I always do my panos in vertical. All right, whew, I'm done.